Okay, today let us continue. Let us consider anemia. So, what do you understand by anemia? Anemia simply means the reduction of oxygen normal carrying capacity. So, when there is a reduction in carrying the oxygen of the blood cells, that can be referred to as anemia. So, there are types of things that can lead to anemia, but all those causes can cause the effect on the red blood cell. So red blood cell, it is the cell in the body that carries oxygen. So whenever the normal morphology, red blood cells become abnormal, it can interfere with the oxygen carrying capacity. So anemia simply means the reduction in the normal oxygen carrying capacity. So anemia can be classified into two blood classes depending on the size of the RBC, on the size of the red blood cells, and also depending on the concentration of the hemoglobin. We have normocytic. A person can be affected with anemia even though the size of the red blood cells is just normal. Meaning, even if the red blood cells doesn't change its size either to increase or decrease, but just remain the same, still a person can be affected with anemia. An example that we can give, it is hemorrhage. Bleeding can lead to anemia. Now, the type of anemia that bleeding can lead to, it's the normocytic anemia, because blood will be lost out of the body, but the size of the red blood cells can't be changed. It can't be small or big, but the number of the red blood cells that is in the body, it is the one that can change, but the size can't be changed. Remember, these three classes are focuses on the size of red blood cells. The next one, it is the macrocytic. A macrocytic, macro means big in size. So macrocytic anemia, this is the situation where the red blood cell size increase. Then microcytic, this is the decreased size in the red blood cell. So next, it is the hemoglobin concentration. We know that the hemoglobin, it gives color to the red blood cell. So when there is too much hemoglobin, in the red blood cells than the normal, what can it cause? It can cause the hyperchromic type of red blood cells. When there is very little hemoglobin than the normal, it can cause the hypochromic. Chrom means color, hypo means less. So hypochromic means the decrease in hemoglobin. Since there is a decrease in hemoglobin, it means that there's also a reduction in the color of the hemoglobin. Okay, so now we have also the normocytic. So normocytic, this is just no change in the concentration of the hemoglobin, but still a person can have anemia. So here we can say also hemolysis, the destructions of red blood cells, can cause normocytic anemia, because destruction of red blood cells, it is destructing the already existing red blood cells. Let's say if there is 1,000 red blood cells in the body, and then the spleen destroys 100 or 1000, it means that the red blood cells will only reduce in number to, sorry, this is 1000 now, let's say 100 destruction, can only reduce in number to 900, but the color isn't changed, and also the size of red blood cells isn't changed, because those remaining 900 red blood cells are the normal red blood cells that were produced together with the one that has been destroyed. Okay, so now these are the classes. So as we'll be considering the types of anemia, we'll be classifying the anemia in these 6 classes, the 3 for the size and also the 3 for the hemoglobin concentration. So let's go to types of anemia. So we have iron deficiency, we have pernicious, we have also immunoglobinopathy. Immunoglobinopathy simply means having a defect in the synthesis of hemoglobin. So we have 2 types of immunoglobinopathy. There is sickle cell anemia and also thalassemia, of which we will consider them in detail. We have also aplastic anemia. So aplastic anemia, it is the problem with the bone marrow function. So the bone marrow functioning, we know that the blood cells, the red blood cells comes from the bone marrow. So when the bone marrow is as a defect, when there is a disorder in the bone marrow, it means that the bone marrow can synthesize the red blood cells. So now, these types of anemia, we will focus them in detail in the same video. So now, let us just consider also some of the conditions that can lead to anemia. So first, we have hemorrhage, just like we talked about. Bleeding. Bleeding can cause a reduction in the red blood cell concentration in the body. Reduction in the red blood cells can lead to anemia. So reduction in the red blood cells can lead to reduction in oxygen carrying capacity. Reduction in oxygen carrying capacity can lead to anemia. So this is, when we talk about hemorrhage, it is just reducing the number of red blood cells that is already in the body. Meaning, hemorrhage does not affect the size of the red blood cells, or it does not affect the color of the red blood cells, but only the number of red blood cells reduces in the body. So let's talk about hemolysis. So hemolysis simply means the destruction of the red blood cells. So destruction of the red blood cells. So there are various factors that can cause hemolysis. The first one can be poisoning. So when there is poison in the red blood cells, so the macrophage can destroy, can break down that red blood cell, and also lead, mercury, snake venom, sulfonamide, and also parasitic infections such as malaria. It can cause the destruction of red blood cells. Now let us talk about iron deficiency anemia. This simply means anemia that comes as a result of not having the required iron for the heme synthesis. So just not having enough iron for the heme synthesis. Now, why iron deficiency can cause anemia? Iron, it is the precursor for making the heme. The hemoglobin, let's talk about hemoglobin. Hemoglobin, it is made up of the two things. We have the hem part and also the globin. Now here, that's where iron takes place when synthesizing. So when there is no iron, does it mean that heme can be synthesized? No, can't be synthesized. So when there is no heme, does it mean that hemoglobin can be synthesized? No, we only have globulin here. So meaning the reduction in iron can cause the reduction in heme, meaning the hemoglobin can be synthesized abnormally such that this can reduce the oxygen carrying capacity of the red blood cells. So if there is a reduction, if there is increase, then that can be referred to anemia. So no iron, no heme, no hemoglobin. So now let's talk about the iron. Iron, it is responsible for the production of the hemoglobin. So when there is little iron, it means that the hemoglobin that will be formed, it will be very small. Since the hemoglobin will be very small, it also means that it will give a little color to the red blood cell. So giving the little color to the red blood cell, to RBC, because of reduced HB, which is hemoglobin. So meaning, since there is a reduction in the color, where can we classify this anemia under? Remember, when you come here, where can we? Is it monocytic, hyperchromic, or hypochromic? It is hypochromic because of the reduction in the color. Okay. Second, we have heme, small heme. The hemoglobin, it also contributes in giving the volume of red blood cells. It also contributes in giving the volume of red blood cells. So meaning too much hemoglobin, very big red blood cells. But if the hemoglobin is too little, it means that even the red blood cell size will be very small. So now, when you come here, under the size, iron deficiency, what type of anemia? Is it microcytic or macrocytic or normocytic? It is microcytic because there is a reduction in hemoglobin. Since there is a reduction in hemoglobin, also reduction in the normal size of the red blood cells. Now, where do you think iron deficiency anemia is common? One, it is mostly common in infants. They become choosy. They are picky. They are picky when it comes to what is to eat. Then also pregnant women. Why? Because of themselves and also their fetus. They both require irons. As a result, you find that in the body of the mother, there will be less iron. As a result, you will find that a person will be looking pale, tired. So here, this is now another protein that we need to know. So this protein, transferrin, that's the word from transferrin. So this is the transporter. The transporter. It transports iron within the blood. To where? It transports to the liver, bone marrow, spleen for storage. for storage. So transferrin transfers iron in the liver to the bone marrow and also to the spleen for storage. Iron in the liver or marrow or spleen, it is stored in form of terphin and hemosiderin. The iron binds to these proteins in order to be stored. Why the iron has to be transported within the blood using this transport? Why can't it go on its own? Because iron, it is poisonous within the blood, meaning the ionic ions are poisonous, so it has to be carried through this protein so that it can be transported properly. Now, how is iron absorbed within the body? First, you need to know the sources of iron. It is from the food that we eat. And the other source, it is the destruction of red blood cells. So since we said the red blood cells contains the hemoglobin, then the hemoglobin, it contains the heme and the globulin. So here the heme contains the iron that we want, and also protein. So when there is a destruction of red blood cells, the hemoglobin is broken down to heme and globin. Then iron is recycled, and the transferrin transfers this iron to the liver, spleen, and also the bone marrow for storage to wait for another synthesis of the red blood cells. Then this protein, it is further broken down into bilirubin. So the destruction of the red blood cells can simply lead to increase in the concentration of bilirubin. So here, the destruction of the red blood cells and the food that we eat, it is the main source of the iron. So the main source concentration of the iron, it is the meat. So this means that those vegetarians, they are at risk of suffering from the condition of anemia because of the reduction in iron, because in vegetables there is this small amount of iron as compared to meat. Iron 3, when we take in the food, we take in iron 3. Okay, when the iron reaches the stomach, it encounters the acidic environment, which is hydrochloric acid, and it is being changed to iron 2 and vitamin C. This iron 2, it is the one that is being absorbed in the small intestine. Now, what are the causes of anemia? Which is the iron? The causes: nutritional deficiency, meaning the diet not rich in iron. Diet not rich in iron can lead to iron deficiency anemia. Also, malabsorption, where the small intestine not being able to absorb nutrients. So since it's not being able to absorb nutrients, it means also that it can't absorb iron. Second, hemorrhage, bleeding. So when we talk about hemorrhage, there is two types. We have the external and the internal. But here we are basically talking about the external. Losing blood can lead to iron deficiency, because when you lose blood, we lose red blood cells. When we lose red blood cells, we also lose the hemoglobin. When we lose hemoglobin, we lose the heme. When we lose the heme, the iron we lose. So hemorrhage or bleeding can lead to iron deficiency, and also menstruation in female, where there is the loss of blood from the breakdown of the endometrium. So same, losing blood, losing hemoglobin, using the heme, using the iron. So how can you treat iron deficiency anemia? Just by giving ferrous sulfate. Now let us talk about pernicious anemia. So pernicious anemia simply means a progressive anemia that comes as a result of the vitamin B12 deficiency. But why these two things cause anemia? Intrinsic factor, it is a molecule where the B12 binds so that the B12 can be absorbed. Mostly B12 and folic the folates, they both cause the red blood cells to be very big, such that they become susceptible for destruction. So these two, they are both responsible for the maturation or the synthesis of DNA. When there is this B12, it means that the DNA won't be mature. So that cell is maturing, it decreases in size. So meaning if there is no DNA maturation, it means that the cell won't reduce in size. It will continue being at the same size, waiting for these substances to come and make the DNA mature. As a result, you find that this type of anemia causes the RBCs to be so big such that they become susceptible for destruction. So pernicious anemia can cause hemolysis. One, it can cause hemolysis, the destruction of the red blood cells. Why? Because of the red blood cells being so big. And also it can cause splenomegaly, the increase or the swelling of the spleen. Why? Because these red blood cells, they accumulate. Since the spleen, it is responsible for detecting which red blood cells is normal, which red blood cells is not normal. So now this, since it is big, it is macrocytic. These red blood cells accumulate in the spleen. As a result, you find that the size of the spleen increase, which we call the condition to be splenomegaly. These red blood cells, they also stick in the vessels, capillaries. They stuck there because of it being big. Since they stuck because of being big, the macrophage plays a role. They engulf these red blood cells and break it down. So pernicious anemia can't lead to iron deficiency anemia. Why? Because these destroyed red blood cells can retain the iron to its storage organs so that it can wait for another synthesis of red blood cells. So now, just like we have said, folates and also B12, they are very much important for the synthesis of nucleotides, which is purine and pyrimidine. These nucleotides are very much important for the synthesis of DNA and also the RNA. So without B12, vitamin, and folate, no DNA methylation. Since no DNA methylation, it means that the cell won't mature. Since the red blood cells won't mature, it means they still remain big. Basically, these two B12, they act as the coenzyme. They work together with the enzyme that is responsible for DNA and RNA synthesis. So they bind to an enzyme and activate it in order to synthesize the DNA. Just like we have said, the B12 binds to the intrinsic factor that is being produced by the parietal cells of the lumen of the cell, parietal cells of the stomach. So these intrinsic factors, when they are not enough, or where there is the deficiency of the intrinsic factor, it means that B12 will have difficulties in being absorbed. So as B12 is being difficulties in being absorbed, it means no methylation of the DNA. Since there is no methylation of the DNA, it means there is pernicious anemia. So when we consider this classification, where can we classify pernicious anemia under? Remember, the cell not getting mature, as a result, it still remain big as it is. So is it macro, or monocytic? It is definitely macrocytic anemia. Okay, so now what can cause the deficiency in the intrinsic factor? Well, one of it is the atrophy of the gastric mucous membrane, where the mucous membrane is not producing the cells that is responsible for intrinsic factor production. Basically, these cells are parietal cells. So the atrophy, the decrease in the cell formation, so the atrophy of the gastric mucous membrane of the stomach. This means no intrinsic factor, no B12, no B12, no DNA, no DNA, no gene, no hemoglobin, no globulin chains, no globin. Okay, so no cell maturation. Now, what are some of the sources of the B12? The main sources of the B12 is in animals. B12, they are almostly don't found in the vegetables. No, they do not found there. So mostly in the liver, in the animals, we can find the B cells and also the lungs and also the heart. They are very rich in B12 vitamins, and less of the B12 are found in cheese, milk, fish, and also egg. But in vegetables, no, they do not found. And also the folate also found in plants and also animals. These are the food where folate is rich, which is the liver, the kidney, the spinach, the cabbage. So now, the other thing that can cause the deficiency of folate, apart from not taking too much of this food, it is the malabsorption. So malabsorption, the intestines not being able to absorb food. So since they are not being able to absorb nutrients, it means even folates won't be absorbed. So these are the conditions or the pathophysiology of pernicious anemia. Thank you. Just make sure you watch the following video. We are going to talk about the hemorrhage, anemia. We are going to talk about aplastic anemia, also immunoglobulopathy, which is sickle cell, and thalassemia. So thank you so much. Make sure you subscribe for you to receive these videos each week, and you need to click the bell icon. Thank you.